Good day, my Telos podcast friends. We have an exciting one for you today. One that many of you have probably heard about. Havuta is just launching on Telos, and we dig deep into the aid organizations around the world and what a big, impactful space this possibly is. And once you start to hear about the problems this is solving, it's such a natural place for blockchain to come in and really have a massive impact. And we get into all the details about where Havuta is coming in first, where they're entering the market, what their plan is, what they actually do, what the user experience is like, how big this problem is that they are solving, and everything about how Telos is helping fix that with blockchain solutions. So this is a really cool podcast. We're sponsored by Scott at Hybrid.Games. Scott is our sound engineer. Big shout out. Thank you, Hybrid.Games. Go check that site out and see what he is building on ESIO software. And also, this is sponsored by a Telos worker proposal, doing big things over here at the Telos podcast. So big shout out to Telos community. Without further ado, I bring to you Paul de Havilland in a very interesting podcast here talking about Havuta.
You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain.
The Telos Podcast.
You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to the Telos Podcast, Paul. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Brendan. It's good to be here. Thanks for asking me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to hear about Havuta and the project. What do you think the most interesting thing going on in Telos right now is?
I'd like to be better informed to be able to answer that. I know that there's a few things that Douglas talked about that are currently under wraps, including to me. So I couldn't talk about obviously them. But one thing I did have a look at yesterday was the Seeds project, which I guess is still yet to launch. We got in touch with them actually yesterday because I felt that there's, while I don't entirely understand the tokenomics that they're grappling with, it looks like a incredibly interesting project and a great use of blockchain and tokenomics. But generally, if you want me to be more general about it, Telos just seems to me to be this highly engaged, generous, and active community that's, in addition to that, is also very professional and run really efficiently. So I know that's kind of an ongoing thing and not a new development, as you asked, but it looks like a fast-growing and it strikes that nice balance between being approachable, democratic, with good governance, but also very professional and well organized. So those things to me are exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely speak to that balance because I've been watching ESIO software for a while and studying it pretty in depth, and it's so cool how the Telos Foundation is there's a structure there that is leading the way but democratically, and then also with the worker proposals and these incentives for people like me who do this podcast to get something in return. I'm incentivized to do the podcast. There's all kinds of little pieces that are incentivized. So there's a decentralized kind of grassroots movement, but there's also this driving force that's pushing through bigger projects like going into enterprise and things like that. So it's a very cool balance, as you put it, I think. How did you find out about Telos? I mean, that's kind of a good question, is how you came into the space or how you found it.
Yeah, so I was working as a blockchain journalist and came across EOS was going through its first fork. Mm-hmm. And so I actually was aware of it before there was Telos, which I know isn't all that long ago. Mm-hmm. So I began covering it, and Douglas was always quite active in correcting any false assertions that I had made and being part of the conversation. So I just became increasingly more, familiar with it, and was covering it as really just as a journalist. And at some point, it seemed to me that what I was looking at here was very much a blockchain 3.0, a third generation blockchain project. That, I mean, as you said, it's decentralized. There is a leadership, a foundation that drives stuff, but it's decentralized. It's democratic. There are people. There's worker proposals and people being incentivized to add value to the project. And it occurred to me at some point that the Telos experiment was very much something that was worth pursuing and of incredible interest. And I think one of the better examples of how good blockchain technology can be for society,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's how familiar I am with it.
So when did you start Havuta, and how did that kind of look, bringing that over to Telos? Did you start it and look actively for blockchains, or start it kind of with the intention of going on to Telos?
We were registered about 6 months ago in Geneva. I would say that we're about a year old in terms of when we started talking about it and thinking about it. We were initially blockchain agnostic, to be honest. All we wanted was technology that worked and met our needs. So we discussed a lot of blockchains with a lot of people and between ourselves, me and Fabienne Dutas, co-founder. And the choice for Telos in the end became reasonably easy and intuitive, from a technological stand, fee structure, speed, scale, all that sort of stuff. Those things were necessary. But there was also this commitment to good governance and the egalitarian ethos, if I can say it like that, and which has actually played out since I told Douglas that we're using Telos. The enthusiasm that we've got from the community has been, we didn't quite expect it, to be honest. It's been really pleasing. That they want projects like ours on their platform. So we definitely wanted to. We made the decision after going through all the Ethereum, Hyperledger, etc. That EOSIO would be the operating system we wanted to use, and Telos was the best one for us for all those reasons. And yeah, I mean, I think we've made the right decision. It's been, I think it works.
Yeah,
it works, and it's a welcoming community.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell people what Havuta is? What's kind of the North Star, and what are you guys planning on doing?
Yeah, so Havuta is a tool that NGOs can use to basically measure impact data, collect impact data. So what we found was that a lot of NGOs, so an NGO, a well-heeled, a multinational NGO that's supported by, the big donor organizations, Gates Foundation, Global Fund, World Bank, all that stuff, they will spend between 5 and 8% on impact evaluation.
And an NGO is a tell people what NGO is.
A non-governmental organization, so a non-profit, people who work in developing countries. They spend between 5 to 8% on impact evaluation, usually by mandate, if they're getting donor money. And what we found was that one of the problems that they faced was that they weren't able to measure their impact over a longer term period of time. So and the ILO spoke a lot about this. An NGO will have an intervention, so a program. They'll go to a community, they'll deliver a program to that community, and they'll have a pretty good idea. They'll do a survey a baseline survey at the beginning and then a survey at the end of the beneficiaries of the program, what they learned, what they got out of it, how, if their lives have changed in what way. And that's it. They don't know how long those impacts will have lasted. They don't know a month from then, 2 months from then, 6 months or a year. And as we know, a lot of the impacts are going to be long lasting, or the intention would be for them to be long lasting. And many NGOs simply don't have the resources to get that data. It's costly, and in challenging environments can be logistically nightmarish to try and actually get data that's anything more than what they can get right at the conclusion of a program. So we've developed a tool whereby they can do that over a distance. And and the way I think we do that is incentivizing beneficiaries to remain engaged. So it's an app on a phone. Beneficiaries are incentivized to remain engaged with the NGO using tokens. So we have a tokenized app, and it's all fueled by the Telos blockchain. So I guess the value proposition to an NGO from us is that we can get you more, better, and longer term data that's a lot cheaper than you would otherwise be able to get it. And it's verified by blockchain technology. So it's our mantra is helping NGOs prove and improve their impact.
So can you give an example of like what a specific program would be, or somewhere that would paint a picture of how this would be used, like the kind of maybe the user experience type of thing?
Yeah, sure. I think the most sort of simple and intuitive example would be for, say, short-term medical missions. So after a natural disaster or something, you get an outbreak of cholera, say. You'll have a team of doctors fly in from Canada into Haiti, say, deliver medical services, and then leave, and have no real connection with the community that they were there to help, to know 2 months later if there's been a return of cholera, how effective the intervention was. And that would be a prime example of where Havuta is going to enable them to keep connected with the beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries incentivized to also stay connected, to keep them abreast of how successful that mission was. Now, other things are a lot around education. So the delivery of hygiene and sanitation, good practice in hygiene and sanitation, for example. And this was actually a big one recently in Southeast Asia. So you'll have an NGO, an NGO go to a community and spend a few days with them, teaching them about good practice in hygiene and sanitation, do a survey at the end of that to see what the community understood, what they didn't understand. And then they will report that impact to their donor or to the general public. But they won't know 2 months later if anybody remembered those learnings, or if they reverted back to how things were before. So it's really about allowing NGOs to provide, to prove to themselves and to their donors that the impact that they're having is long-term and lasting. And I think that's what everybody wants in the end. It's just unfeasible. Largely, it has been unfeasible in the past to actually do that, to get that long-term proof of long-term impact. And so those are examples.
Those are great examples. What's the cell phone usage like in some of those places? Is that the main, I guess the main criteria is they're going to have cell phones to make it happen?
There is a web app people can use, as beneficiaries can use as well, but it's a great question, and it was actually the first question I asked Fabienne. Mm-hmm. How do people use cell phones? And we'll be surprised to hear that cell phones in Southeast Asia, cell phone penetration in Southeast Asia is about where it is in some parts of Europe. Africa, it's rising. Even in the poorest countries, poorest communities in Africa, cell phone penetration is rising about 10% per year, and has done so for the past 5 or 6 years. So it went from something like 10, 15%, and it's now sitting around 40, 45%. South Asia, so India is lagging a little bit at around 25%, and obviously that, you know, we rely on people having cell phones and smartphones, internet access. So that's a constraint, but it's a constraint that's very quickly disappearing. And you'll often find that a lot of people in developing countries, the first paycheck is they'll buy a cell phone before they eat. Kind of thing. Yeah, it's the way most people in the developing countries access internet.
It's really interesting phenomenon with like a lot of the African countries basically skipped PCs and skipped the computer revolution. They just kind of waited until cell phones came out, and now it's like now they leapfrogged, and now all of a sudden they are kind of the adopters of internet on telephone. So on phone, yeah,
absolutely. They also, I mean, and there's lots of evidence on that. They're leapfrogging banking as well.
Yeah.
You know, banking services were unavailable. People went to mobile phones. So that leapfrogging effect is real, and it's fast. It's really fast. And also you are talking about fairly young-ish populations in a lot of developing countries. So, you know, it's even the growth is faster than it even is, you know, for us. We've a prime example is Myanmar, which is, you know, has just come out of 30 odd years of military dictatorship. They have a surging cell phone. Basically, everyone owns a cell phone. You can buy a cell phone for under $100, a Chinese-made smartphone for less than $100. Everyone's got one. There's no data. Internet services are reasonably good, not great, but good enough. There's 60 million people with cell phones, and there's absolutely no data at all because no one's been in there for 40 years, you know? So yeah, that what I thought and imagined would be a constraint to growth for us is actually, it's not.
And what do you mean by no data? Like they don't have data service, or they don't have to pay for data?
Sorry, data in the NGO sense.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
How many children are there? How many children have suffered from malnutrition? Nobody knows because we just haven't been there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that talking about that, I know you have the Monitor program, so the smartphone app where people in health programs can update daily so that resources can be deployed. And it sounds like one of the, not only are you going to get something specific like cholera, I would think, and over time you can say, what kind of impact do we have fixing this specific disease, but also kind of disease agnostic, I think, as you guys put it on your website. Yes. But you can take more of a holistic approach. So I think that's a pretty cool concept, like a little bit bigger picture, that you're talking about teaching, educating, and bringing some education in there about how diseases are transferred and cleanliness and things like that. So what's that look like? What's a holistic approach look like? What does that look like for you guys?
The impact of internet and smartphone penetration is probably something that, and we've looked at a lot of data points and stuff, and I don't think we quite understand how significant it can potentially be. So we have the Tracer and the Monitor programs. As an example, most people who contract Ebola contracted from either in hospital or from someone on their way to hospital with it. That's how most people contract it. So Havuta is going to allow people to report symptoms from their home without moving and without potentially infecting someone else on the way to a hospital or getting it at a hospital. That's just one example of, I think there are a lot of kind of known unknowns, to use a Rumsfeldism. We're not quite sure of the extent, and I don't think it's a day that we goes by that we don't get an inquiry of, can we use your app in this way or in this way, ways that we hadn't even thought of, So what we started off with was the idea of getting long-term impact data into the hands of NGOs and ultimately to their donors to ensure a flow of funding. And it's grown a little bit into, there are whole other areas of application that we may not have thought of. And there's probably a whole lot more that are yet to sort of come across our desks. And Cambodia is a great example of this. Malaria, dengue. And I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but millions and hundreds of millions of dollars on preventing malaria in Cambodia. And for good reason. Malaria kills people. There's a dengue epidemic and there's an obesity epidemic in Cambodia. And 2 people last year died of malaria. Maybe we need to be a little bit more holistic about our approach to what diseases we're actually treating or we're actually looking to resolve,
Yeah, without data, you're just kind of, attacking the ones that are scary in some cases. I mean, the ones that have a history as opposed to what's happening right now, possibly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And data is going to drive all of this. A more holistic approach is probably going to better serve more people.
How do they look at data now? How do they collect it? Is that the same type of thing where they're kind of, when their boots on the ground at the end of the project, that's kind of when they're collecting data, or how are they doing it specifically?
So the donor fund, the Global Fund is a donor organization. They support NGOs who do the work on the ground.
Okay.
The NGOs then report the data back to the Global Fund.
Okay.
So the Global Fund kind of aggregates, I guess, that data. So they're a donor. Then the people on the NGOs on the ground are the ones who are gathering the data. It's short term. It's immediately post the intervention, and this is it's one of those things that's long been known as a problem, but how to fix it is it's expensive. You can fix it, but it's expensive. It's been traditionally quite expensive.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the Havuta is kind of the focusing on the impact, basically recording the impact long term. There's a lot of talk also, or just another problem with the NGO space is just the allocation of funds. Is that something you might expand into, the transparency of where the money goes, basically? Is that something you see Havuta expanding into? Is that a use case as well?
So directly, the answer is no. But indirectly, the answer would be yes. Ultimately, over the long term, donor organizations fund or seek to fund effective NGOs. We can help effective NGOs prove that they're effective and therefore generate funds. I think that I was explaining to a client the other day that I don't think ineffective NGOs are going to like us very much because we do kind of shine a light on how impactful how effective organizations are. Good NGOs, especially good NGOs who don't have access to who don't have the profile and don't have access to as much funds as others, they're going to benefit the most from implementing Havuta. So, in terms of directing funds, I think that's in the end that all does feed back into impact anyway. So we will influence that by helping NGOs get better data. Essentially, it's not a direct focus of ours.
Yeah, that makes sense though. That seems like a more market-driven approach to get data on what these NGOs are actually doing, how successful they are long term, and then let the people giving money direct it better. That
Yeah,
seems like,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
as opposed to trying to go all the way up the supply chain and create transparency and monitor it. So
Exactly. We did it. We were posed with the question fairly recently: why didn't we just create an NGO? And my answer was: A, the last thing the world needs is another NGO begging for money, and
Mhm.
B, what we want to do is let the people who know what they're doing on the ground do their job and do it well, and better inform them with what their impact is, for better or for worse, and then let the market work out where the funding goes. I think that's what that's the value we bring.
Yeah, and in giving the data, like you're saying, to the NGOs so that they can then tweak their approach and try to get better numbers, and then that's big as well. Just if for a specific NGO, it's going to help them have better results because they're going to have some data to work off also. So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I mean, that's the other side of the coin as well. It's not supposed to be a punishment. It's not supposed to be shining a light on inefficiency. Although it does do that, our mantra is prove and improve. So we're giving you more data so that you can get more funds, but also with that data you can tweak your program. As you said, it's just about tweaking, using beneficiary driven data to tweak things in the future and get better.
Mhm. What's the NGO scene look like in general? Is there thousands of NGOs? Is there hundreds of NGOs? How many NGOs are there, and how many of them are operating efficiently, you think?
I guess 35,000 around the world. There's some crazy figures floating around, and bear in mind, an NGO, a dude with a ponytail and a pipe dream can turn up in Congo and register an NGO, call himself an NGO because
Okay.
he gave someone some food. So we have to be a little bit careful about how we classify NGOs. I'd put the UN registered NGOs number about 35,000. There are varying sizes. There's so if I exclude all the kind of crazy figures, because by some counts there is an NGO for every 5 people in India, for example.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's a big sector. It's the 7th largest economy in the world if it were its own economy.
Oh wow.
It's massive. It's huge. Yeah.
Wow,
It's
that's
unthinkably large.
so, yeah, so bigger picture. I mean, if there was some sort of, is there any sort of standard for reporting or just for results? Is there like any kind of accredited body where people say, oh, these were the results that says the NGO got, or this is the rating that this NGO has? Is that out there at all?
No. If you're getting taxpayer funds or you're getting funds from some of the larger donor agencies, so we're talking Global Fund, Gates Foundation, the EU institutions, World Bank. Those guys, they're going to need very thorough and very rigorous reporting. They'll have rigorous reporting requirements. If you're not getting access to institutional funds, if you're getting money from the general public, the reporting onus is far less rigorous. So I don't think you could say there's particular standards that apply to everybody. It really depends on what kind of money whose money you're trying to get. If it's institutional money, the standards are higher. And everyone has their own way of measuring their impact. All the donors have different ways of assessing those measurements. It is hard to kind of define any particular global standard that applies to everyone. We've talked to NGOs and a lot because they just can't afford it. A lot of local, especially smaller NGOs, local NGOs, do not do impact evaluations at all. We'd actually, and we're interested in kind of working with those smaller organizations as well to help them out, because we can do that for them in a much more affordable way.
So what is the strategy as far as market penetration, and what type of NGOs was your focus going to be on?
At the end of September, we have three programs of about a couple hundred beneficiaries in each, and they're with two large NGOs, international NGOs. They're French. So one's in Vietnam, one's in Thailand, and one's in Cambodia. I also have a couple of meetings with another few NGOs in Cambodia next week. One's a local NGO and one is a major global NGO. Need to be approaching the bigger players. Dan, I mean, I'm incredibly cognizant of the fact that there are so many incredibly effective local NGOs who you will never have heard of, who I would never have heard of, who have no profile, barely any money. They got a tiny little office with a fan in the corner and a guy on a laptop, who do amazing, wonderful work, who could not ordinarily afford to be providing impact assessments and hiring consultants to do all of that sort of stuff. And we want to work with those guys. We want to reward effective development efforts at whatever scale. So yeah, we're taking, again, I guess, a holistic approach. We want to be inclusive. We want to be flexible with our pricing so that we can actually capture, the NGOs that don't have enough money but do effective work, and with our help could perhaps open further funnels of funding.
Yeah, it seems like you're really going to be operating on some sort of network effect. If you can get a few of these bigger NGOs to kind of make a splash, then all of a sudden a lot of those small ones come in because the opportunity's there with some sort of, quote unquote standard where they can compare themselves to these big organizations that are using it. That's a cool strategy. What would be like the strategy for getting the cell phone users to input the data, like on a daily basis? Like, how's your cholera doing? And I know it's incentivized by the token, but what about educating them, getting them to download the app? Where's that step come in?
Yeah, that will be largely up to the NGOs themselves. Mm-hmm. We would expect the onboarding. The ideal way to do it is to onboard during an intervention, during a program, because then you've got your beneficiaries are sitting in front of you. Okay, everybody download the app now, enter in your details. All beneficiaries are whitelisted by an NGO first. So get them downloading the app first. Do your initial questionnaire, then right then and there, and then you have hopefully an active audience. There's going to be some loss over time, there'll be some dropouts and people losing phones and all that kind of stuff. But what we're saying to NGOs is we would encourage you to onboard at the moment, because that's a lot easier than trying to find people after the fact. So yeah, onboarding as soon as you can. And then hopefully having decent retention of those beneficiaries. It's not that is one of the difficulties is the onboarding, especially if the program was 6 months ago. I mean, that's where it gets hard.
Yeah, it's definitely, the NGOs are going to want to do it at the time of at the time they're there. That makes sense. Yeah. So will Havuta have a token that's incentivizing the model, or are they using Telos or their own token?
We have our own Havuta impact evaluation tokens. They're called highs. So beneficiaries earn highs for submitting data, answering questions, submitting data. The highs are not and this is still in flux, but at the moment the model is that the highs are not. They don't have a dollar. They don't have a nominal dollar value, which is it's about not corrupting data with money, essentially. So they're worth, on face value, they're worth zero. So the process would be an NGO requests highs of us. We will send them from our wallet to theirs. And as beneficiaries respond with data to their questions, they receive highs in return for that. They can then convert those highs into incentives. And, at the moment, that's again up to, we're trying to kind of work out a way where Havuta can offer incentives as well. And all this is in flux. It could change a year from now. But at the moment, we have NGOs who are offering incentives in return for a certain number of highs, offering incentives. It's, a meal somewhere or those kind of things, little things. It's important we've got to tread a fairly fine line about what money does to data, because it can corrupt it.
Yeah, it seems like that's a logical model, though, with the NGOs already on the ground providing services, to have them provide something extra, basically to reward people for the data.
One good a thing that I don't know that I've been talking about and we've been thinking about it is that if the intervention proved to be unsuccessful, then highs could be converted into a second go at it, kind of thing. Whether that's an incentive enough for the beneficiaries, we're not sure. We're toying with all these different things, and I think in different contexts, it's going to work in different ways. But to be honest, we're probably not best placed to work all that out. I think NGOs on the ground, they're really well resourced. They can get in-kind things really easily, usually. And they're going to know the cultural context and the community context, what's going to work, what's going to best incentivize the right answers, accurate answers, good data.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. That's part of the decentralized revolution, is that people act in communities of 30 people, and there's that's own environment, and economics and barter and all that happens on small levels. If you get too far away from it and try to give incentives, it's harder to give incentives from further away. So I think you're probably right on with that NGOs are going to have to be creative and come up with that, but they're the perfect people to do it. Sounds like
you phrase that better than I did.
Where do you see this going for let's say 10 or 20 years down the road? What do you think the whole industry looks like? What do you think the NGO scene could look like if these incentive models start working?
I am a major believer in the power of decentralization and in the inevitability of decentralization and the transparency that comes with that, and the whole don't trust, verify movement. So what I would like to see is that, you've seen studies, we've all read that public trust in institutions, banks, governments, as well as charities and NGOs it's falling fast. And I don't think that reverses. So the don't trust, verify model, I believe is that's the future, and not just in the development sector, but everywhere. So that's the direction I see everyone headed, and I just think that it's the development sector in particular, because it's so dispersed and it's so opaque, and we're not really sure where our money goes sometimes, and we have to just take people on their word that what they're doing with donations. It's challenging. They're working in challenging environments. It's global. I think it's a perfect sector to be genuinely decentralized. In particular, when it comes to how we measure impact. So that's how I would like to see things occur. There's going to be some short-term resistance. People are resistant to change and all that sort of stuff. But I think, in the end, if we're all held to higher levels of accountability, and that forces us to improve what we do and get better, then everybody wins.
So, and I think that's a interesting point. Kind of the idea that in developing places, maybe this is where the best spot for a decentralization movement is, because sometimes it's easier to build from kind of the ground up, from scratch, instead of taking instead of having these big monolith institutions and trying to then unbuild and decentralize them. This is a good example of a place where the technology can leapfrog in the same way that the personal computer was leapfrogged by cell phones in a place like Africa.
Right.
This may be another good example of kind of how that ends up working.
Yeah. And I think it's the future is exciting. I think that it's impossible to predict exactly how this is all going to play out, right? But I'm a major believer in distributed ledger technology to drive decentralized information sharing, and I it's kind of exciting to think about the possibilities that could bring to everybody, including the poorest 2 billion people on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you specifically, Havuta is operating in a really cool, impactful area. A lot of blockchain tech is dealing with things that aren't going to have such a huge impact. This is something that you can see if there's some sort of network effect, if there's a way to get adoption and NGOs kind of on this incentivized to use something like this, it can have a massive impact. It can save lives. It can feed people. It can make people healthy. That's a really cool area to be building a company in. I'm excited for that. That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah.
We
are too. We're kind of happy with what we've created. We're only 10% there. It's there's a lot more building to do, but no, we're happy with what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. So what's the next step for you guys? Where are you at right now, and what's the next 3 to 6 months look like?
Yeah, it's about penetration. It's about making sure people know who we are and what we can do. A lot of it is going to be communicating the misconceptions about, you say blockchain to somebody and they think of crypto scams and that's just the first thing that comes to people's heads. So I think a lot of the short-term challenge for us is to breach those misconceptions, and to say to people, you don't have to be in control of everything for your data to be valid. You bring yourself to let go a little bit of control and don't ask people to trust so much. Be open to being verified publicly. So there's some walls, there's some challenges, there's going to be some misfirings, I guess. But I think, it's really getting penetration by communicating the benefits and dispelling the misconceptions. I guess it would be that specifically my focus for the next 6 months.
Fantastic. Well, this is an exciting project. The Telos community, I know, has been really excited about this. So it'll be, I'm sure people will be excited to hear this and get kind of a deep dive into what the team's all about. So as we start to wind down here, do you have any final thoughts, any messages you'd like to get out there? And then where can people find you? What's the best place to contact you on the interwebs?
On the interwebs, we are at havuta.com. And yeah, as a final thought, I think it's a shout out to the Telos community. So Fabienne, my co-founder, is not savvy with, I shouldn't say savvy. He's not au fait with the blockchain. It's not his world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little more familiar with it. He joined the Telegram group a few days ago and couldn't believe the enthusiasm and the welcome that we kind of got from the Telos community. So I think I kind of like to end it by thanking the Telos Foundation, Douglas, yourself, everybody for the generosity of enthusiasm that we've received has been it's been quite overwhelming and very humbling, to be honest.
Yeah, well, that's a great one to end on. And this is the Telos podcast, and shout out to the community. Thank you guys. And it was a pleasure to talk to you today, Paul. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is.